A lot of people have accused us here at Sounds Like a Drum of being staunchly anti-muffling, but the truth is we love to use muffling to get a great sound out of a drum, and that includes especially if we can make that muffling invisible. In the past, we've done some experiments with muffling that didn't interfere with us being able to use all the real estate on the head, and in those cases, it was about not having that on top of the head. This is going a step further and not just giving us all of that, but also getting us a really specific sound that we were trying to get out of this drum. Before we get into what we did to this drum, let's hear it at this tension, which happens to be finger tight. Now, before you question what finger tight is, just a reminder, I tightened these with my fingers. There was never a drum key on the batter side of this drum. The snare side is at a normal medium tension, but this head is fully slack, and it sounds fantastic. What we did is we placed a studio ring or an E-ring in between the batter side head and the batter side bearing edge, similar to some built-in muffling rings that you may have seen on bass drum heads and other places. What this affords us is all of the muffling we would get out of this ring, but because it's on the bottom side of the head against the bearing edge, it's also under pressure and tension from the tension rods, which is giving us a lot more of an effect and a different effect than if it were resting on top as normal. Unlike the muffling rings built into heads such as a Genera that you may have seen, by using these studio rings, they are much thicker than those, and additionally we are using the wider 2-inch wide version, so we're getting a tremendous amount of effect. This is de facto fantastic for super low tunings and things that we think of as the snom range, or possibly when we're going after detuned snare sounds. For reference, here's a quick check-in on what the batter side sounds like alone and also what the snare side sounds like. If you like what you're seeing today, there are going to be extended demos and more content from today's video over on the Patreon. Please follow the link below. It's a great way to help us continue to make these videos, bring you this content, and do experiments like we did today. We have a lot of hacks and things like this that we've gone through over the years that are really great through the entire tuning range, but since we're starting out with virtually no tension on here, we'd like to move through a few more tuning ranges and see what actually sounds good. Next up, something in the low to medium range. Now this is still working great. It has a different character than the first one. It's a little bit tighter, but still in the generally same vicinity in terms of what it's doing and what kind of tone and response we're getting. It's important for us to mention right here, especially because of the sounds that we're getting. There's no EQ and there's no compression. There's no production on this of any kind. These are just raw sounds. Some of the things that are less discernible just through video, as we're doing today, is how this feels to hit. It's really different than using something like a big fat snare drum or perhaps like a full cutout head dropped on here, because it's only around the edge, it's relatively narrow, and I'm still getting a fairly normal response out of the head from the snare drum given the tension that it's at. Granted, when we're at finger tight or pretty low like this, there isn't a tremendous amount of rebound, but it does feel very good to hit, and we're still getting a ton of snare response out of it even at lower dynamics. Additionally, since we don't have anything loose and laying on the top of the drum, there's zero concern that any of the muffling is going to come flying off or get caught by like a brush or a broom or some other kind of implement. We're good to go on the entire head, nothing to worry about. Okay, let's step it up one more and go into a medium-high range and see what we get out of that. Things are starting to get a little bit dicey now. It's getting a little bit boxy, and we're starting to get pitches out of the batter head, which is something that we were kind of expecting because it tends to go with muffle rings sometimes. It's not as good as the lower tunings. We are again using the widest of the studio rings that are available from Evans. They do make narrower ones, which may actually be more effective at these higher tunings, and if anybody out there tries that out, let us know and see what happens. Also, if you're curious about what would happen if we did this to the toms, if that's something you'd like to see, let us know in the comments, because we are always looking for ideas that are going to help you guys out. The fun thing about these tunings is that, again, we are leaving everything raw right now, and because of that, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with the sound at this tension. A little bit of EQ or possibly post-production, or if you maybe want to be laying stuff on top of the drum for different sorts of sounds, you can get something totally usable out of this. It's just not as good raw as the other two were. Out of just morbid curiosity, now we're going to pitch it up as high as we're comfortable with this setup and see if we can get some of that pitchiness out and find something we like. Not so much. This is definitely going to need some work if we chose to go this route, but again, if we used a narrower muffling ring underneath this, we might have different results, not to mention that this is all on a single ply 10mm coated head. We could use something else and get a completely different set of results. This means for us and for you that the floodgates are open with this. There's a lot of possibilities and a lot of variables, even from drum to drum, so it's definitely worth checking out and seeing what works for you and what your setup gets you. Today is one of those experiments that reminds us that not every cool thing has to work at every tuning or with every drum or with every drum head. Some things are super specialized and we need to use those in our toolkit and remember them for situations where we want a specific sound and can think back and go, I know a shortcut to that sound, I can make it happen in 5 minutes, and then you're good to go and you can get back to playing. Just because this doesn't work in these settings at a high tension doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater here. This is a thing that got us the coolest snom sound out of the most standard snare drum that we have ever gotten here. Now, a word on risks inherent in this kind of experiment. If we're hammering a drum that's tuned finger tight, the life of the head is definitely going to get shortened, so think about that. Number 2, rim shots didn't really sound good at any of the tunings today, so if you're considering using something like this for your drum set, definitely go for center of the drum, no rim. But don't forget also that the cross-stick sound is totally usable too, so you're not relegated to just that one thing. And lastly, if you're concerned about your bearing edges, doing something like this with a muffling ring, a plastic one made out of drumhead material, you don't need to worry because, again, it's the same material that the heads are made out of. So it's just adding a layer of it. It's not going to damage the heads at all, no matter what your drum's made out of. If you want to go the DIY route and cut a ring out of a pre-existing drum head, that's an option you can do too, but bear in mind, the diameter needs to be pretty specific for this to fit, and the joy of using the pre-made muffling ring is that it is perfectly round, so we don't need to be perfect in terms of making it for ourselves. You know, we've been doing this here for a little over 5 years now, and just like today, we are still getting surprised by things that pop into our heads, we try out and get a shocking, hopefully good result. And it's just a great reminder that there's always more to explore. Don't be afraid to try things out, something you've seen on the internet, something you've seen us do, or something that you thought up yourself. Be careful, move slow, be judicious about your choices, and look for that inspiration every day.